The following content is a narrated account intended for storytelling and discussion.
Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They came for poker and bourbon. She came with binoculars, fake bylaws, and a militia in pastel vests. One cabin, 6 veterans, and a suburban war that started with a newsletter and nearly ended in gunfire. This isn't fiction. This is how an HOA declared war and lost. They say you can't buy peace, but I damn well paid for mine. 5 acres of hardwood forest tucked deep into the Appalachians, just shy of the Tennessee-North Carolina border. No neighbors, no traffic, no damn HOA bylaws about mailbox height or the shade of my tin roof. Just a gravel drive, a log cabin I built with my own 2 hands, and the sounds of wind through trees and coyotes singing at night. That's all I ever wanted after 26 years in the service. Out here, I don't need to explain myself. My name's Travis Grant. I'm 52 years old, Army Special Forces, retired. These days, I make my living teaching firearm safety and tactical readiness to folks who want to learn how to protect what's theirs. On paper, I'm a consultant, which is code for I don't take crap from anyone, and I damn well know the law. The cabin's nothing fancy. Solar panels on the roof, well water, propane backup, and a cellar stocked for a biblical flood. Once a month, I host what we call The Gathering, a reunion of old brothers in arms. Freddie, who used to be a deputy U.S. Marshal. Milo, my old spotter from Baghdad, now a wilderness medic in Utah. Ben, retired sergeant major with a bionic knee and the dirtiest laugh you've ever heard. There's also Isaac, ex-combat doc-turned-trauma therapist. Jason, our team's lawyer now. Yes, we have one. And Luis, who served in border recon and now works wildfire containment in the Smokies. 6 of us, cigars, bourbon, poker chips, and grilled meat. Sometimes we argue, sometimes we cry, but mostly we just laugh and remember the days we weren't so damn creaky. It was simple, beautiful, unbothered, until she showed up. Her name was Karen Bell, mid-50s, platinum bob. Looked like she jogged in pearl earrings and yelled at grocery clerks for sport. She ran the Forest Peak HOA, which sounded like something a realtor made up to sell overpriced ranch homes with 0 personality. Their development started creeping up the mountain about 10 years back. Faux cabins with satellite dishes, SUV moms and dads named Todd, but I never worried. My land is a private parcel, deeded, registered, surveyed, and legally outside any HOA jurisdiction. When I bought it, I made damn sure of that. Apparently Karen hadn't gotten the memo. It started with looks. Side eyes from the road as she drove her Lexus past the gated trail leading to my cabin. Then came the binoculars. She'd stop at the end of her neighborhood cul-de-sac, which, mind you, ends in a locked county access road, and peer through the trees like she was birdwatching for terrorists. I didn't think much of it at first. Weird neighbor. Happens. But then came the paranoia. One night, Milo showed up in a black Jeep with Arizona plates, roof rack, tactical shovel, the usual overlanding rig. Karen saw him through the trees and must have assumed he was part of a militia. Another time, Isaac brought a trauma kit in a hard case, which, I admit, did look like it could hold a sniper rifle if you squinted hard enough and had 0 training. And yes, Jason once stepped out to make a satellite call for a client and used a long-range handset. We're all licensed, clean, and above board. But to Karen, apparently we were a paramilitary cell stockpiling weapons in the mountains, preparing for war. I got the first hint of her lunacy from an old guy named Carl who lives 2 lots down from the HOA border. He flagged me down one morning and said, "Hey Travis, that lady from Forest Peak asked me if I'd seen you and your crew running drills out here." Drills. Drills, Carl? You know, he added, like tactical maneuvers. I told her y'all were probably just camping or something. She didn't look convinced. I laughed it off. I figured maybe she'd move on to accusing squirrels of treason next, but I underestimated her thirst for control. A week later, the Forest Peak HOA newsletter featured a community safety alert, a full-page article penned by Karen herself, warning residents of unregistered non-resident activity on adjacent properties and advising increased vigilance. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. The map included a dotted red circle labeled Potential Threat Zone, right over the ridge where my land begins. Freddie called me the day that newsletter came out. "You're famous, brother," he said, chuckling. "I just saw your mountain listed as a threat vector. Do I get hazard pay for coming up next weekend?" I should have been annoyed. Instead, I was amused. That was my mistake, because while I laughed, Karen was preparing. She called a special meeting of her HOA's board, formed what she proudly dubbed an emergency security task force, recruited 3 men: Pete, a retired mall cop with something to prove; Joel, a discount Rambo who once worked night security at a tire warehouse; and her 17-year-old nephew, Brett, still acne-faced, not old enough to own a shotgun in this county. They called themselves volunteers, but what they became was something far more dangerous. And while they trained, God knows how or where, I grilled steaks for my friends, played poker under the stars, and slept soundly behind steel-reinforced doors, not realizing that a suburban dictator and her gaggle of wannabe warriors had just added me to their enemy list, not realizing they were about to cross the line. The next time I saw Karen, she was wearing a reflective vest like she worked highway patrol and carried a clipboard like she was auditing God. She was pacing the edge of her HOA's paved cul-de-sac, barking into her Bluetooth headset like she ran the Department of Homeland Security. I watched her through binoculars from my porch. Ironic, I know, as she gestured wildly in my direction. I couldn't hear her, but the body language screamed, "Deploy the damn drones!" I thought about waving. Then I thought better of it. No need to poke the bear, especially not one that's convinced you're breeding domestic insurgents over grilled burgers and poker nights. Turns out she wasn't just muttering into the wind. She was organizing. The following week, I got a call from a friend of mine at the county clerk's office. "Hey Travis," she said, "just a heads up. Someone from Forest Peak HOA submitted a public inquiry about your parcel. Wanted to see if your deed includes HOA language." I damn near laughed into the receiver. "I wrote that deed myself," I said. "It doesn't." "Yeah," she replied. "I know." But she tried to file a preliminary request to amend your zoning overlay. My smile dropped. Amend zoning? That's not paranoia anymore. That's a move. A legal one, a quiet one. The kind of bureaucratic chess you don't notice until your king is already cornered. I asked her who filed the request. She sighed. "You already know who. Karen Bell." Now she'd officially crossed from Karen into Commandant. By the end of that week, I had neighbors texting me screenshots. Apparently, Karen had posted in the Forest Peak neighborhood app, tagging a dozen people and warning them to report any unusual men in tactical gear or with out-of-state license plates seen entering the suspect zone. That'd be me, and Milo, and Luis, and pretty much anyone who looked like they could bench press a log. Still, I figured most folks would roll their eyes and go back to worrying about raccoons in the trash. That is, until I got a message from a buddy of mine named Tony, who sells outdoor gear in town. "Hey Trav, you know a lady named Karen Bell. Suburban, maybe 50-something, looks like she teaches Pilates but carries herself like Mussolini? That's her. She came in last night asking if we sold bear mace in bulk. Said she was forming a community watch detail. Wanted to know if we had camouflage tactical vests in medium." I choked. "You're kidding." She bought 4. One in pink. I sat back in my chair. This wasn't just neighborhood gossip anymore. This was movement, formation, paranoia mutating into mission. 2 days later, she made it official. Forest Peak HOA sent out a formal bulletin. Formation of the Forest Peak Emergency Security Task Force. Under the supervision of HOA President Karen Bell. It was printed on letterhead like it came straight from Capitol Hill. The bulletin included a list of initial volunteers, which read like a rejected Saturday Night Live sketch. Pete Bledsoe, retired private security, fired for excessive flashlight usage. Joel Parker, HOA treasurer, once tackled a kid for skateboarding on the sidewalk. Brett Halverson, Karen's teenage nephew, junior ROTC dropout, currently grounded for vaping. They called themselves the Guardians. God help us all. Their mission statement: to ensure the safety and aesthetic security of our community through voluntary patrol and proactive observation of potential threats adjacent to our borders. Translation: they were going to play militia at my expense. And then came the protocol. Karen personally delivered a community defense plan to each HOA resident's mailbox. It included instructions on identifying suspicious behavior, things like unusual beards, non-standard vehicles, and my personal favorite, campfire smoke in off-season months. It also encouraged residents to report repeat gatherings of non-residents with military posture What the hell is military posture? Standing straight, having shoulders. This thing was 5 pages long. It had a color-coded threat level chart, borrowed shamelessly from post-9/11 airport security, with my area marked orange high, 1 step below red crisis. I stared at the scanned copy one neighbor forwarded me and had to take a long, deep breath before I blew bourbon out my nose. But then came the twist I didn't expect. She forged a document, a real one. One of her board members, Joel, the ex-tire warehouse night guard, resigned from the HOA and dropped a bombshell. Karen had created a fake meeting record claiming the board had unanimously approved surveillance of Parcel 48, which is my land. Only 2 problems. 1, my parcel isn't under her jurisdiction. 2, the other board members never signed that document. She forged their names. I know this because Joel sent copies of the original minutes, and they didn't match what she filed to the HOA records database. Not even close. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some bored housewife on a power trip. This was a delusional calculating manipulator escalating her fantasy with fake documents, unauthorized surveillance, and what now looked like a soft coup inside her HOA. And worse, she had enablers, people who'd bought into her fear campaign. People who were now armed, badged with embroidered patches that said Forest Peak Task Force, and walking around like they were deputized by the Constitution itself. It wasn't funny anymore. So I met with Jason, my old squad mate turned criminal defense attorney, and showed him everything. The newsletter, the Facebook posts, the task force flyer, and the forged documents. He studied them all in silence, then looked up and said 3 words. "This is war." I just nodded, quietly. Because even though I hadn't raised my voice and hadn't broken a single law, I knew he was right. It was a Friday night, just after sunset. The kind of quiet where the only sound is firewood cracking and someone cussing softly over a lost poker hand. I was manning the grill, venison steaks this time, while Jason tried to bluff with a pair of 3s like it was the Holy Grail. Freddie was mid-rant about how anybody who puts ketchup on a ribeye should be prosecuted. And Milo was about 2 fingers deep into a bottle of Booker's, telling some story about a bear he once wrestled in Utah. The usual, 6 of us were there. Old friends, veterans. Each one of us armed, of course, legally, concealed, and respectfully. None of that mattered, though, because this night, we weren't the ones about to draw first. The dog was the first to pick it up. Daisy, my blue heeler. She froze by the porch, ears perked. A low growl, almost imperceptible. Then I felt it too. A shift in the air. Seconds later came the sound, a soft metallic clink, like a boot on a loose fence wire. Then the crunch of underbrush. Multiple sets of feet. I motioned to Freddie with my eyes. He nodded once and killed the lantern. The porch went dim, just the firelight flickering against the trees. We weren't panicking. We'd done this dance before, overseas mostly. But this wasn't Fallujah. This was Tennessee. My home. Then the shouting started. "You are surrounded. This is HOA security. Drop your weapons and exit with hands visible." I blinked. For half a second I thought this had to be a joke. Some idiotic prank. But no one was laughing. Out from the trees emerged 4 figures in mismatched tactical vests, holding weapons, low-ready positions, sloppily. I recognized 2 of them instantly, Pete and Joel. And behind them, with a paintball helmet that barely fit over his head, was Brett, the kid. He was pointing what looked like a pump-action shotgun, the muzzle trembling like a leaf. And at the front, Karen, in full view, wearing a flak vest over a pink windbreaker, holding a flashlight like it was a holy relic. My stomach turned. They were armed. They had crossed my fence, and they were issuing demands. Freddie stood up slowly, both hands in plain sight. "You're trespassing on private land," he said calmly. "Armed, without consent or legal authority. That's a felony." Karen ignored him. "I have reason to believe this is a hostile compound," she snapped. "You're harboring weapons and unauthorized personnel. You're not under HOA supervision." That last part almost made me laugh. Not under HOA supervision, as if that gave her jurisdiction, as if she were judge, jury, and suburban warlord. Jason, bless him, was already rolling on his phone camera. Milo, he slid his burner phone from his vest and hit the panic button that sent an auto ping to the county sheriff, tagged with our exact GPS coordinates. Luis slipped behind the cabin in the shadows, no sudden moves, looping wide to flank. Ben stayed seated, hands resting on the table like we were still in a poker game, and Isaac stepped forward with both palms up. "Put the guns down," he said. "Nobody needs to get hurt." Karen pointed a trembling finger at him. "You're not in charge here." And then it all went sideways. Brett, the kid, tried to maneuver closer, stepping through a pile of firewood. His foot caught a loose log. He stumbled. That's when Luis moved. One clean motion, he grabbed the shotgun, twisted, disarmed the boy, and shoved him down into the mud. Fast, clean, efficient. Karen screamed. Pete raised his weapon, a modified AR with no serial number. Freddie drew, leveled, and froze. "Don't," he warned, low and lethal. "You won't get that trigger halfway before I drop you." Joel stepped back, shaking. I could see the panic flood his face like a dam burst, but none of us fired. Not one shot. We weren't here for a firefight. We were here to live. Less than 5 minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed up the ridgeline. Backup arrived like an avalanche. Blue lights tearing through the woods, headlights slicing shadows. 2 sheriff's units, 1 ranger vehicle, and 1 unmarked SUV. The cavalry. Hands went up. The HOA task force dropped their weapons, save for Karen, who just stood there, eyes wild, clutching her flashlight like it was a crucifix. I walked out slowly, hands visible, and greeted the sheriff. "Evening, Cal." "Jesus Christ, Travis," he muttered. "What the hell is this?" "You tell me," I said, nodding toward the Suburban 4. Karen immediately launched into a screeching tirade. "They're planning something. They're armed. They're dangerous. They've got radios." The sheriff blinked. "Ma'am, you entered private property with weapons, without a warrant, without law enforcement coordination, and under false authority. I'm the HOA president. You're a civilian. You've just committed armed trespass and aggravated intimidation. That's not oversight. That's a felony." Freddie stepped forward, handed the sheriff the phone with video footage. Jason handed over the GPS logs. Milo offered up stills from the surveillance camera that caught the moment they breached the fence. Luis stood next to the kid, still sitting in the mud, and said this one had a live round. "No safety." The sheriff cursed under his breath. "Get them cuffed," he told his deputy. "All of them." I stood by the porch, arms crossed, and watched them get zip-tied and escorted to the SUVs. Brett was crying now. Pete was muttering something about being tricked. Karen just kept shouting about jurisdiction. And all I could think was, this was real. This actually happened. This was no longer about poker games or veterans blowing off steam. This was war by bureaucracy. And it had just gone hot. I've seen a lot of things in my life. Combat zones, black sites, riots, and foreign streets. But watching Karen Bell scream at a county sheriff while zip-tied and covered in mud might be one of the most absurdly surreal things I've ever witnessed. They hauled her and her little band of discount vigilantes into the county office just after midnight. Sheriff Callahan was trying hard not to let his exhaustion show, but even he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 3 hours. I was there with Jason, sitting quietly across from Karen in the interview room. She didn't even glance at me. "I should be thanked," she spat, her voice shaking not with fear, but with indignation. "Do you even understand what I prevented?" Callahan raised an eyebrow. "You prevented 6 men from enjoying poker night." Karen leaned forward like she was giving a TED Talk on lunacy. "I prevented a domestic threat from escalating. That property is outside the HOA. It's unregulated. They bring in outsiders with unregistered gear, radios, tactical signals. I've seen them. They cook meat at midnight like it's some kind of war feast." Jason chuckled. "You just described half of Tennessee on a Friday." Karen whipped her head toward him. "You think this is funny? I was protecting our community. Do you know how easy it is for domestic terrorism to start in places like that? Unwatched, ungoverned, rural." "You mean," I said flatly, "private." She didn't reply. Instead, she doubled down. "You all want to ignore it, but when something happens, the blood will be on your hands, not mine." I did what I had to. The sheriff let out a slow, tired sigh. "Ma'am," he said, laying down the printouts we'd handed over, GPS logs, videos, the camera footage showing Brett holding a shotgun on my lawn, the recorded threats. "This isn't a theory. It's an armed incursion onto private property, without cause or jurisdiction. That's not protection. That's criminal trespass, brandishing, and unlawful detainment." Her jaw tightened. Jason leaned forward, flipping to the page showing the GPS logs. You passed a locked gate, crossed a fence marked with state-recognized no trespassing signage, while armed and uninvited. You claimed authority based on your position in a private HOA, which doesn't legally extend past Forest Peak's platted boundaries. You organized it, led it, and executed it. Still no reaction. She doesn't think she did anything wrong, I muttered. That's the problem. Karen looked right at me for the first time since the whole thing began. Her eyes were wild, not scared, but manic, defiant. You people think you're above everyone just because you have guns and titles and fancy words. But you don't belong here. You never did. The room went quiet. Jason smiled, slow and deliberate. Actually, my client has a federally recorded deed, 5 generations of military service, and a legal perimeter with certified GPS coordinates. You, Karen, have a flyer, a fantasy, and felony charges. Congratulations. The sheriff nodded. We're charging all 4 with armed trespass, conspiracy to intimidate, unlawful militia activity under state code, and reckless endangerment of a minor. The DA will decide if it goes federal. That was the first time Karen's bravado cracked. For a split second, she looked unsure. Then came the real kicker. That night, when I got back to the cabin, there was a package in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a dead songbird, carefully wrapped in brown paper. The smell hit me before I even saw it. On the inside of the box lid was a note, hand-printed in black marker. You won the first round, but you're not safe. We see everything. I didn't blink. I just carried the box to the porch, put it on a metal tray, and burned it with kerosene. Then I walked to the safe, pulled out the encrypted drive, and uploaded every camera feed, drone log, and document we had to 3 redundant off-site servers. By morning, Jason had forwarded the mailbox photos to the sheriff, and Isaac had one of his federal contacts start the trace. The handwriting on the note matched a grocery list found in Brett's school locker, a digital scan his mom had uploaded to a shared family calendar. I had no idea how they got that evidence. I didn't ask, but it meant one thing loud and clear. They were doubling down. Not just Karen, someone else too. Maybe more. Sheriff Callahan called me that afternoon. We're issuing a protective order, he said. Full buffer zone around your land. Also, I'm escalating this, sending the whole case to the district attorney's office. The threats cross a line good, because something told me we weren't dealing with a bored suburban tyrant anymore. This was obsession. It started small, as most big things do. A question here. A name that didn't add up there. A hunch. Jason was the first to say it out loud. Something stinks. She didn't just get paranoid and snap. This was planned, coordinated. Paper trails don't lie, so we followed the paper. Over the next 10 days, Jason and Isaac turned into bloodhounds. One combed through legal filings, zoning requests, and HOA board minutes. The other talked to everyone from Karen's old college roommate to the guy who delivers propane to Forest Peak. What we found was worse than we expected. Karen hadn't just forged one document. She had created an entire fabricated resolution, supposedly passed by the Forest Peak HOA board. It stated that Parcel 48, my land, was under community surveillance due to increased threat classification. The fake resolution included voting signatures from 5 board members. 3 of them had resigned over a year ago. One was in hospice care. The last one? A guy named Nolan Gray. He died 6 months back. His obituary was public record. Karen had still signed his name with a shaky imitation of his handwriting and filed it to the HOA's internal registry. Jason looked at me across my kitchen table and said, "This is felony-level fraud, Travis. Not petty HOA nonsense. She filed this to influence neighbors to justify illegal action. She weaponized her authority. He sent everything to the DA's office." The same night, the sheriff forwarded the contents of Karen's personal devices seized during her arrest. Jason got a warrant to review them as part of my civil suit. That's when it all blew wide open. Emails, dozens of them, between Karen and select board members. Between Karen and a community development consultant who, according to the signature line, worked for a real estate firm based in Asheville. The emails detailed a plan going back 6 months to restructure bordering parcels into transitional zones for long-term annexation. Translation: she wanted my land, not because of paranoia, not because of safety, because her real estate partners wanted to absorb my acreage into the next phase of development. She'd pitched it as a security corridor, said it would be easier to sell higher-priced homes if the ridge was neutralized. Neutralized. Like I was some insurgent squatting on the strategic high ground. She even had satellite maps marked with proposed road expansions, one of which ran straight through my well and fire pit. Jason forwarded it all to the district attorney and then filed an emergency motion for a federal injunction. We weren't just defending anymore. We were going on offense. That same week, Brett, the kid with the shotgun, was processed through juvenile court. Turns out the weapon he carried had no serial number and had been modified with a homemade bump stock. It had been stored in a garage under Karen's name. The judge didn't take it lightly. Brett was remanded to juvenile supervision, mandatory psychological counseling, and barred from owning or handling firearms until he turned 25. His parents? Furious. They turned over a box of papers they'd found in Karen's house. HOA printouts, maps of my land, even a copy of my license plate from a hunting trip 2 years ago. Karen had been watching me for a long time. Not just watching, cataloging. Obsession-level documentation. I'll admit, I sat with that box for a while after they handed it over, in silence, just leafing through printouts of my own cabin, annotated with red pen like I was part of a case study. Notes on what kind of truck Luis drove, times when Ben arrived. One sheet had a list of patterns observed and ended with potential weakness, isolation, no HOA oversight, legal ambiguity or jurisdiction. She really thought she could wear me down with bureaucracy. That if she twisted enough bylaws and filed enough fake forms, she could take it all. The land, the peace, the freedom. But that's the thing about people like her. They think everything is negotiable. That rules only matter when they benefit the ones writing them. She forgot that some of us read the fine print, especially when our lives depend on it. They say the best defense is a good offense. Apparently, Karen believed it too. Only she chose to mount her offense in the worst way possible. 3 weeks after the raid, in the middle of our case against her, she flipped the script. She sued me, filed a civil injunction in federal court, claiming I was operating a paramilitary compound under the guise of private recreation, that I was intimidating neighboring residents, and that my presence posed an existential threat to the peace and safety of Forest Peak. The language sounded like it was lifted straight from a Homeland Security memo. Jason walked into my cabin, dropped the folder on the table, and said, "She's playing for the long game. If she gets this granted, it opens the door to forced injunctions, land use restrictions, hell, maybe even federal land seizure under public safety grounds." My first response? I laughed. Then I realized he wasn't joking. "She's trying to drag this into the feds," he said. "Get the court to see you as a potential domestic threat. If she gets that label to stick, you'll spend years just trying to clear your name." The woman wasn't just dangerous, she was methodical. So we pushed back, hard. We filed a countersuit for malicious prosecution, accompanied by a comprehensive evidentiary brief that included the forged HOA resolutions, surveillance photos she'd taken of my property, the box of documents she'd compiled, and the dead bird. Mailbox stunt. But Jason wasn't satisfied with just defending me. He wanted to break her case from the inside out, and he had a plan. We waited for the preliminary hearing. Karen arrived in court wearing a navy blue suit, hair pinned back like she was ready to testify before Congress. She brought a man with her, early 60s, smug posture, too slick tie. He introduced himself as Randall Corvin, a national security consultant and expert in domestic threat mitigation. The man rattled off credentials like he was auditioning for CNN. Corvin testified that patterns of irregular male gatherings, use of military-style equipment, and lack of residential oversight created a classic risk indicator of paramilitary behavior. He cited case studies from post-9/11 intel memos and name-dropped incidents in Oregon and Michigan. It was impressive until we pulled the curtain. Jason stood up. "Mr. Corvin, can you please confirm your PhD institution?" "Columbia State," he replied confidently. Jason nodded. "And your last federal contract?" 2014, Department of Homeland Security. Jason turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Columbia State is a diploma mill shut down in 2011 by federal investigators. Mr. Corvin never held a clearance, and the only government contract he's had was a security camera installation for a strip mall in Charlotte." Gasps. Jason continued. "We also subpoenaed Mr. Corvin's business records. He has filed bankruptcy twice, and was disbarred from expert testimony in the Eastern District of Virginia for misrepresentation of credentials. Karen's face went pale. The judge called for a recess, and when we came back, the court threw out the injunction with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile. But that wasn't even the worst of it. The judge referred both Karen and her attorney for investigation under Rule 11, fraud upon the court, a serious offense, the kind that gets lawyers disbarred and plaintiffs indicted. Jason was calm as ever. She tried to use the court system like a weapon. That's not just abuse, that's a felony in the making. By the time we left the courthouse, Karen had stopped speaking. She didn't even look at me as she walked past. But the fight wasn't over, because what she had done, from the fake documents to the mail threats to the courtroom manipulation, had now crossed every line. This wasn't civil anymore. This was criminal. And she'd just stepped into the fire with a trail of gasoline behind her. They say when the hammer finally drops, it's fast, but loud. It started with a phone call. "Mr. Grant," said a calm voice. "This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Kelsey Raymond, Eastern District of Tennessee. We'd like to speak with you regarding the matter of Karen Bell and the Forest Peak Homeowners Association." Just like that, the case jumped from county court to federal prosecution. Jason and I drove into Knoxville 2 days later and met with the Joint Task Force, one federal prosecutor, one FBI agent, and a representative from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They laid out the situation calmly, like they'd done this 100 times. And maybe they had. But I hadn't. They showed us a timeline, from the forged HOA minutes and illegal surveillance to the armed trespassing, the underage possession of a modified firearm, and the use of private HOA authority to justify armed action against a civilian target. Karen had unknowingly triggered several violations of Title of the U.S. Code, including conspiracy to interfere with civil rights, use of intimidation under color of law, unlawful militia activity, a state-level misdemeanor turned felony due to weapons and coordination, mail threats crossing state lines, forgery of official documents to justify coercive action. They called it a cocktail of suburban authoritarianism and weaponized paranoia. The agents even had new evidence. Turns out, Karen had been emailing a fringe group, a pseudo-legal Citizens Defense League, for months asking how to legally remove threats from unregulated parcels. The group wasn't illegal, but they were absolutely on watch lists. And Karen had used their templates to draft her fake HOA resolutions. She wasn't a concerned citizen anymore. She was a self-radicalized, power-drunk threat with a paper crown and a loaded gun. The feds moved fast. Within a week, they filed a multi-count indictment against her and 2 of her co-conspirators, Pete and Joel. Brett, being a minor, was already under juvenile oversight, but his sealed record would reflect the conspiratorial nature of the offense. Charges included conspiracy to commit armed trespass, use of fraudulent documents in pursuit of coercion, interference with the lawful enjoyment of private property, intentional endangerment of a minor with an unregistered firearm, obstruction of justice through misuse of civil litigation. The moment it hit the news, Forest Peak HOA began to implode. Board members resigned en masse. Residents, the ones who had once clapped for Karen at community meetings, were now scrambling to distance themselves, some even filing lawsuits of their own, claiming she had misused HOA funds to pay for her task force gear and expert consultants. One neighbor came forward with receipts. Karen had used the HOA's landscaping budget to buy tactical flashlights, vests, and bear mace, all under the line item, perimeter beautification. Another admitted she'd been pressured to sign surveillance support forms. She didn't understand, under the pretense that my land was being used for criminal training. The FBI collected it all. When the indictment was officially unsealed, the headlines were surreal. HOA president charged with armed intrusion and conspiracy in federal court. Suburban paranoia, the woman who tried to enforce martial law on a mountain. By then, the forest. Peak HOA had been suspended by the county development office and its management license revoked. The community's affairs were temporarily handed over to a neutral receivership appointed by the state. Karen's attorney quit the same day. She tried to make a deal, a plea bargain. The DA rejected it. The U.S. attorney rejected it. The case was too public, too dangerous to go soft on. Her actions weren't just reckless. They were calculated, dangerous, and precedent-setting. When the trial began, I was there. Front row. Karen looked smaller than I remembered. The power suit was gone, just a gray cardigan, flat hair, and the eyes of a woman who realized too late that the HOA didn't give her diplomatic immunity. Freddie leaned over to me and whispered, "If I ever get that crazy, shoot me." Twice I didn't laugh, not because it wasn't funny, but because Karen Bell had almost turned a poker night into a funeral. And now, finally, justice was catching up to her. It took almost a year for everything to fully resolve. 12 months of hearings, motions, delays, interviews, depositions, and more paperwork than a Pentagon audit. Jason said it best. Justice is slow, but when it lands like a freight train. Karen was convicted on 5 counts, including armed criminal trespass, document forgery, and conspiracy to interfere with civil rights. The judge called her actions a dangerous example of authoritarian escalation under the guise of community protection. She got 12 years. No parole for the first 7. Pete got 6 years. Joel, 7, after they found he helped delete surveillance footage from his home camera system. Brett, the kid, he got off easier, juvenile reform program. His parents pulled him from Forest Peak and moved to Missouri. Last I heard, he was taking GED night classes and had taken up fishing. Quietly. I hope he stays that way. The HOA, gone, officially dissolved under a joint order from the County and State Registrar of Civic Associations. The assets were frozen, the remaining funds placed into escrow, and all HOA-controlled properties handed over to county administrative receivership. A neutral third party now handles everything from trash pickup to snow plowing. Ironically, the community finally runs smoother than it did under Karen's reign. Forest Peak is still there, but the signs are different now. No safety task force banners, no patrol vests, just a faded bulletin board with flyers for yoga, lost cats, and firewood sales. And my land? Still mine. Still sovereign. Still quiet. Only now, there's a reinforced gate, facial recognition cameras, and a bright new sign right by the road. Black letters on brushed steel. Private property. We play poker. We grill meat. Without a warrant, you're not invited. The boys loved it. We had the first real gathering again not long after the sentencing. 6 of us. No drama, no sirens. Just old friends, whiskey, and stories nobody else would believe if we told them. Freddie made ribs. Milo rigged a homemade smoker. Jason brought a Karen-proof legal contract printed in Comic Sans and made us all sign it as a joke. And before we started the game, I raised a glass and said, "To freedom, peace, and dumbasses like Karen, may they always underestimate the quiet ones." Ben added, "And may they never forget. You don't screw with veterans on private land." We laughed. Hard. It was the kind of laugh that says, we're home again. No fear. No fences we didn't build ourselves. Just the clean, unshakable calm of a mountain cabin where the only thing illegal is folding on a full house.